the sounds of bygone eras with lifelike fidelity. It can create sounds previously confined to our imagination. Sound reproduced precisely, consistently. Sound released. Hey, it's Will. So that was my way of showing some appreciation for speakers, because we often take technology like this for granted. The ability to record and play back audio has changed our lives as musicians and music listeners in so many ways. It's made music more accessible, easier to share, and easier to preserve for future generations. However, in this video, I'm going to be focusing on some of the ways technology has pushed the boundaries of what's possible in music. I'm going to break it down into a few different sections, roughly ordered by the complexity of the idea. Starting with timbre. A lot of the new creative possibilities offered to us by technology are centered around something called timbre. You might have heard timbre described as a proportion of different overtones above a fundamental, but I think that description leaves out some really important components of timbre, and there's actually an easier way to understand it. Timbre is the character of sound aside from pitch and rhythm. It's what makes the sound of a flute different than the sound of a clarinet, even if they're playing the same note. Dynamic. Compressed. Every minute detail can be defined with extreme precision and repeated flawlessly. High-quality speaker systems and headphones are fairly accessible these days, so artists can be somewhat confident that the listeners who are invested enough to care about these details will be able to hear them. Timbre has always been really important to music. Before recorded music became prevalent, one of the main ways to control timbre was orchestration. The orchestrator might have delegated a melody to one instrument because it would sound sweet in that particular register, or another because it would sound really beefy. Orchestrators also have a lot of practical concerns, like whether or not a melody can be heard. A lot of the principles of orchestration are still in use, but they've been extended and in some cases replaced by something else called production. One of the most basic but most significant innovations in music is the ability to change the balance between instruments without affecting their timbre. This process is called automation. Typically, when an instrument is played louder, it also gets brighter, to say the least. It allows for unique combinations of timbres to be heard. For example,
T-5, 4,
a whispering voice
2,
over
1.
a rocket. Think of it this way. When you're listening on headphones, it's like you're in the best seat of a concert hall. The whole orchestra is arranged around that one spot to create the ideal listening experience. If there's a quiet clarinet solo, the arrangement doesn't need to thin out, and the orchestra doesn't need to play any quieter. The soloist can just get up and sit 2 feet away from you to play the part. If the part calls for an instrument to be slightly brighter or darker, or even one that changes throughout the piece, it's not impractical when you're inside that simulated space. Speaking of space, another exciting implication for the flexibility of timbre in recorded audio is the ability to change the sense of space at will. We can do so by using digital reverbs or recording in different locations. In David Byrne's book, How Music Works, he describes the relationship between the reverberant characteristic of music venues and the music that's played there. He suggests that we write music that's appropriate for the space and not the other way around. For example, church music is often modal and modulates slowly to avoid being dissonant with the long reverb tails. Music born from punk venues is often fast and aggressive to fill the absorptive dead space of a packed club. The newest venues, however, headphones, car stereos, and hi-fi systems allow us to write what we want and then create a space that fits the music instead of the other way around. We can also fluidly change between styles or even have them coexist in a theoretical space. Being able to balance sounds and create fitting spaces for them is the foundation for all the new sonic possibilities. It's what makes them practical and useful. Today, it's most common for timbre to reinforce the meaning of the notes. If the rhythm is aggressive, then the timbre usually hopes to make it more aggressive. If the vocalist is laid back and cool, then the production will usually try to double down on expressing that. The second most common case is when timbre plays the primary role in expressing an idea, but does so without creating any sort of conflict. Lo-fi hip-hop is a great example of this, as the nostalgic atmosphere is primarily portrayed through the timbre, as opposed to the notes. Timbre rarely presents its own narrative in a way that contradicts the message of the notes, but when it does, it can be really effective. One of my favorite examples comes from A Clockwork Orange. The soundtrack centers around Beethoven's Ninth. Every movement is played as it was originally intended with an orchestra, until the last movement, an ode to joy, where it's played on a synthesizer. Simply put, Beethoven's message of brotherhood amongst men becomes twisted and turned on its head right as it's intended to reach its climax.
Stop it, please, I beg you! It's a sin! It's a sin! It's a sin! It's a sin!
Some noise genres can get by without using pitch and rhythm in any sort of conventional sense. In this way, timbre can create its own arc of tension and release. In rock music, we might see a constrained, slinky, edgy verse, tension, followed by an explosive, distorted chorus, release. This is tension and release in timbre over time. Timbre also has a relationship to melody similar to that of harmony. Distortion on a metal guitar riff is something like an octave. It's perfectly consonant and only serves as reinforcement. A cassette emulation for a lo-fi piano loop is kind of like a major third. It's consonant, but it's also adding something new. The synth-illustrated rendition of an ode to joy is kind of like a tritone. It's totally dissonant, but it's also adding something new. This is like tension and release and timbre in a vertical dimension. This technology is still brand new relative to music itself. We're still breaking new ground with all the amazing things that audio can do for music. I'm hoping that the ability to reproduce timbres precisely and consistently will make expressions like these more accessible. Personally, I think this is an extremely exciting time in music history. If you're someone who loves music, I hope this video has helped you enjoy it just a bit more, and if you're one of those people who feels like every good song has been written, or that there's nothing new left to do, I hope this video has pointed you in a new direction, and maybe let me make you a mixtape. So, thank you. Bye.